Well, since our kids are in the service today, I thought it might be appropriate to start with a game today. Here is the game. I am going to show you a silhouette of a figure, and it is your job to shout out what it is you think you see. Got it? Okay, all right, here we go. We're going to start it easy here. What is this? You are right. The one orange person was wrong. It was an apple. What about this? Oh, that was easy. Mickey Mouse. That's right. What about this? Statue of Liberty. Okay, very good, very good. All right, now we're going to move up in difficulty a little bit. It might get a little bit harder. Maybe not that much harder. Yeah, that's right. It is an elephant. Kids might get this one. Pikachu. Yeah, very good. Colosseum. Very good, very good. I'm starting to worry I made it too easy. Well, let's see. Now we're ramping up the difficulty. What is this? We think we all agree it's a cat. It is a tiger. What about this? I think most of us agree it's a truck, but it is a fire truck. What about this? Yeah, it's a sphinx. I should have made this more difficult. All right. Next difficulty level. What is this? Believe it or not, that is one of our elders, Brandon Fombell. It is amazing what you can see if you look on Facebook. Just go back a few years. Next up, what do you think this is? That is none other than Rhonda Salomon. So I texted her daughters last night and I said, hey, can you send me a photo of Rhonda? And they didn't respond at all to me. And I thought, okay, I guess they're loyal to their mom. They're not going to embarrass their mom. But they came through for me this morning, okay? So not that loyal, I guess. What about this one? It's everyone's favorite Avenger, Michael Davis, everybody. Well, just like this game shows, it is hard to see in the dark, right? If all we see is the black, we don't know what's there. And the hard truth that I want us to struggle with, it's a struggle we already have, is this fact. God often leaves us in the dark, does he not? God rarely gives us the full picture. We rarely see what it is God is doing. Sometimes he shows us enough, kind of like some of these silhouettes we saw, where we can kind of make out what it is, but oftentimes we look around, we see what's going on, and we have no idea what God is doing. Can you think of things like that? Perhaps evil. It's frustrating when all we can see is the darkness. I mean, have you ever just laid in your bed at 2 a.m., unable to sleep, looking at the ceiling, just struggling and thinking about all the problems in life? Just getting consumed with that darkness, asking, is it always going to stay this way? What is God doing here? What's his plan? And all you hear is silence. It's a very common experience. And let me just say, if you've experienced something like that, you already understand a whole lot more about the book of Habakkuk than you realize. And so I'll call you to turn over to the book of Habakkuk. It's in the back of your Old Testament. No shame if you need to use the table of contents. Sometimes it's like, where's Waldo, trying to find some of these minor prophets. And so go ahead and find the book of Habakkuk. And let me just give you a 60-second recap, tell you what the story of Habakkuk is all about. Habakkuk, he looks at the world and he asks God, he says, hey, God, this is a mess. Your people of Judah, they have lost their way. Violence is everywhere. Evil is winning. I've been crying out to you, God, but you haven't answered. What are you doing here? And then God does reply. He says, oh, I'm doing something. I am raising up the Babylonians in order to judge Judah for their sins. Habakkuk says, oh, God, I didn't realize that's your plan. I think that plan needs a little bit of work. I don't think I like that plan, God. I mean, have you even looked at Babylon? This people is even more wicked than we are. How can you, a good and just sovereign God, use a people more wicked than we are to judge us? That doesn't seem fair, God. And then God says this. He says, listen here, Habby. I know they're evil, okay? I know it. Nothing gets past me. And you know what? Their time is coming too. I'm going to judge them on the day I appoint. I am using them for a time, but I will judge them in my time, Habakkuk. So, this is what I want you to do. Just trust me and wait. And that's where we leave Habakkuk at the end of chapter 2. Now in chapter 3, what we're going to see is how Habakkuk responds. Will he continue to question God, or will he begin to trust God even though he has no idea how God is doing his plan, what his plan is and how he's enacting it? What a dilemma. Question God or trust God? And I think that's a relevant one for today because I would guess some of us here in this room are in something of a similar place. Like Habakkuk, we've cried out to God in the darkness, yet God has left us in the darkness. He's not yet delivered us. Yet he has the nerve to call us to trust him in the darkness before he even turns the lights on? Is that even possible for me to have trust in a situation like that? Well, I think, spoiler alert, Habakkuk is about to show us that it is. Chapter 3 is a whole song. He writes about it. And in this song, Habakkuk chapter 3, are two lessons for us that I believe teach us how we can have trust in God, even in whatever darkness we're struggling with too. And so, beginning in verse 1, I think we see our first lesson. Remember, everyone say remember. Remember how God breaks into the darkness. And so before Habakkuk looks forward, he looks back. It doesn't start with his current circumstances. Instead, he starts with remembering who God has already shown himself to be. Look at verse 2. Lord, I have heard your report, and I stand in awe of your deeds. In the midst of the years, revive your work. In the midst of the years, make it known. In wrath, remember mercy. That is a God, do it again prayer. Lord, I have heard of what you have done. I have heard what you're like. I know it. I know that when your people were trapped and helpless and hopeless, you intervened. Lord, do that kind of work again. That's the foundation for our faith. I hope you understand that. The foundation for our faith is not anything in us. The foundation for our faith is God's faithfulness. And so if you don't know God's faithfulness, if you're not reading the Bible or anything, let me just say this as gently and lovingly as I can. It's no wonder sometimes we struggle to have faith. If you don't study God's faithfulness, it's going to be hard for you to trust in God's faithfulness. You see, faith, we have this very warped idea about in our culture today about what it's supposed to be. Faith is not meant to be blind. Faith is not blindly trusting in something you have no reason to believe. Faith is trusting in what you already know to be true, even whenever you can't see the details in any given moment. If you know God was faithful then, and he promises he will be faithful in the future, you have a case for a reasonable, grounded faith. And see, what follows here in verses 3 through 15, I think are some of the most dramatic pictures of God in the entire Bible. Look with me. Let's read together. Verse 3, God came from Teman, and the Holy One from Mount Paran. His splendor covered the heavens, and the earth was full of his praise. His brightness was like the light. Rays flashed from his hand, and there he veiled his power. Before him went pestilence, and plague followed at his heels. He stood and measured the earth. He looked and shook the nations. Then the eternal mountains were scattered. The everlasting hills sank low. His were the everlasting ways. I saw the tents of Cushan in affliction. The curtains of the land of Midian did tremble. Was your wrath against the rivers, O Lord? Was your anger against the rivers, or your indignation against the sea, when you rode on your horses on your chariot of salvation? You stripped the sheath from your bow, calling for many arrows. You split the earth with rivers. The mountains saw you and writhed. The raging waters swept on. The deep gave forth its voice. It lifted its hands on high. The sun and moon stood still in their place at the light of your arrows as they sped, at the flash of your glittering spear. You marched through the earth in fury. You threshed the nations in anger. You went out for the salvation of your people, for the salvation of your anointed. You crushed the head of the house of the wicked, laying him bare from thigh to neck. You pierced with his own arrows the heads of his warriors, who came like a whirlwind to scatter me, rejoicing as if to devour the poor in secret. You trampled the sea with your horses, the surging of mighty waters. What are we reading here? This is not a tame God. This is not a soft, domesticated, inspirational quote stitched on a pillow at your grandmother's house God. This is an incredible, magnificent, glorious God. The God who creates earthquakes, the God before whom mountains tremble, the God who splits seas, the God who makes nations shake, the God who shows up and evil starts panicking. Habakkuk, what is he doing? He is remembering the Exodus. He is remembering the plagues, the parted sea. This is the story of the Israelites. He is remembering what God did to Pharaoh, the most powerful man on the earth, when God decided it was the appointed time. See, Habakkuk, he sees that all these mighty acts of the past were not just for the past. No, they were patterns. They were previews that taught us principles. They pointed forward. You see, Egypt, as it's talking about here, Habakkuk is remembering, Egypt was not the last evil nation, nor would be Babylon, which is Habakkuk's context. See, this is the pattern of the world. Proud powers rise up and oppose God. They oppress the weak. They exalt themselves against God. And the pattern of God is just as consistent. He brings them down. Every time. He brings evil down. Therefore, when we remember rightly, we can have this confidence that whatever evil emerges in the past, in the present, or in the future, God will defeat it. God will bring justice. God will rescue his people. Every single time. He will bring another Exodus when he decides to. See, that is his heart. Look at verse 13. You went out for the salvation of your people. See, through all his power, all his judgment, all his work here, God is always moving towards one thing: salvation. This is his goal, salvation. I think one of the most practical things you can do whenever you find yourself in places of darkness where there is evil around and you don't understand why is remember that important truth. God works all things together for salvation. That is why the Psalms repeat themselves. This is why Israel rehearsed the Exodus year after year. This is why we preach the gospel every week here at Calvary. This is why we don't have just one gospel, but 4 gospels in our New Testament. Because repetition is not pointless. For people who are in the dark, repetition is survival. We must repeat those truths that are most important to us. Think about Psalm 23. Probably one of the most famous Psalms, and sitting right in the middle of Psalm 23 is probably one of the most famous verses. Though I walk through the shadow of the valley of death, I will fear no evil. But what comes on either side of that verse? God's faithfulness. You look at the beginning of that psalm, and you see pictures of God's faithfulness, and you look at the end of that psalm, and like hills, they are reminders while you're in the valley that God is good and God delivers. See, how can we walk in the darkness? By remembering what's on either side of it. That's the lesson that we're supposed to be taught as we look at places here like Habakkuk chapter 3. When nothing in your life feels good, remember what God has already done and remember what He's promised He will do. You see, when the darkness gets loud, what should be our response? Get louder. Preach the mighty works of God to your own soul. Say, Lord, I've seen your faithfulness. Do it again. I've seen how you save. Do it again. The second lesson I think we can find from Habakkuk here is a much harder one. Rejoice. Everyone say rejoice. So we remember and then we rejoice. But we rejoice before God breaks into the darkness. That before is the tricky part. See, after processing his faith and remembering God's faithfulness, Habakkuk, he makes his choice. At the climax of the whole book, right there at the very end, he makes his choice. And what is his choice? Faith. But notice, he does not make this choice after his circumstances change. He makes the choice while he's still in the dark. That's the whole point. I mean, look at verse 16. I hear and my body trembles. My lips quiver at the sound. Rottenness enters into my bones. My legs tremble beneath me. That is not a man enjoying a chest-thumping triumph. That is a man whose body is physically reacting to what he knows is coming. He is shaken. He is scared. He is still in the middle of it. But then he says this, Yet I will quietly wait. I will quietly wait for all your promises to come true, God. See, faith, it does not mean you stop feeling fear. It means that fear does not get the last word. Now look at verses 17 through 19. Though the fig tree should not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, the produce of the olive fail, and the fields yield no fruit, the flock be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. God the Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the deer's. He makes me tread on my high places. These are some of my favorite verses in all the Scripture. Because what Habakkuk is describing here, no figs, no grapes, no olives, no grain, no sheep, no cattle, this is not just a bad harvest. This is total collapse. I mean, this is famine. This is death knocking at the door. And yet, right in the middle of that, what does Habakkuk say? Yet I will rejoice. That 3-letter word is the whole sermon right there. Y-E-T, yet. Not when my conditions improve, not when I have received all the answers, not whenever I get what I want, I will rejoice. Yet, even now, yet, in the darkness, yet, I will rejoice. In 1851, A missionary named Alan Gardner set sail for South America, believing that God had called him to bring the gospel to the southern tip of the continent. And while he was gone, everything you could possibly imagine went wrong. The supplies ran out, the team was stranded, and one by one, they began to die from illness, from exposure, from starvation. When a rescue ship finally arrived, they found Gardner's journal. He was the last one to die. And as you look in his journal, in these final entries written while he was starving to death on this remote shore, having accomplished nothing he set out to do, what would you expect to see? Let me tell you, what he wrote was not full of bitterness. There was not despair. There were not accusations at God. Instead, what he wrote was filled with joy, a sense of the nearness and goodness of God. That although Gardner had lost everything, he somehow still had everything. See, we have the tendency to infer the goodness of God by the goodness we see around us. If life is good, God must be good. But what both Habakkuk and Gardner show us is something different, that it is possible by faith to sense the goodness of God even when your circumstances give you no earthly reason to. It's not that we're supposed to enjoy the suffering, but what God is teaching us is that we can still rejoice in Him in the middle of it anyway. This is what Paul was talking about in Philippians whenever he says he has learned to have joy and contentment in any situation. This exact truth. Therefore, this is the hard part. How should we see the darkness around us? Well, not what is our often tendency, which is to think, oh, God, He doesn't have a control of this world. We should see the darkness around us, the darkness in your life and my life. All the stuff we see in the news, we should see that as an invitation to lean not on our own understanding, to lean not on our own comfort, to lean not on what we want, but instead to have a defiant faith. A defiant faith that stakes everything on the character and the promises of God, even before we see those promises visibly fulfilled. That is faith. That is faith, a faith which is defiant of circumstances. So over the course of this book, over the course of the book of Habakkuk, we see him go through a transformation. He starts with tension and struggle, but he ends with peace. How does this happen? What changed? Not his circumstances. Those stayed the same. What changed was his focus. He went from looking at his problems to looking at God. Habakkuk, he struggled, he wrestled, he questions, he protests, but eventually Habakkuk bows. Wrestling with God led to resting in God. And that can be your journey too, in your darkness. However, there is a barrier that will make it impossible for you to ever accept that invitation of faith. A barrier that unless you correct it, it will undermine every effort you make to remember and rejoice so that you will never trust God. What is it? It is believing that God owes you the light. It's believing that if life is hard, God's getting it wrong. In those times, what I think is important to remember that we might be corrected is something very basic, but very humbling. It's this: He is God, and I am not. He is God, and I am not. Bruce referenced this earlier in the service, Isaiah 55, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts." So, meaning, when God doesn't act the way we expected, the most likely situation is not that God made a mistake. The most likely situation is that we can't see what he sees. What do we truly need? See, God only answers our prayers in two ways. Either with what we ask for, or with something better that we couldn't have imagined. It may not look better. It may not feel better, but God promises that all that happens is for our good and his glory. You can think of it like a parent and a child. If you gave, parents in the room, if you gave your child everything you asked for, would you be a good parent? No, because children do not know what is right to ask for. No, if you left it up to a 5-year-old to set his day, the agenda would start with candy for breakfast. Let me watch 6 hours of Coco Melon on YouTube. Let me jump off of something I shouldn't jump off of. Let me cut my own hair, and then let me pet an alligator. We don't know what we need. See, sometimes the most loving thing you can do as a parent is say no and drag them kicking and screaming into something they hate. Why? Because you know better. You see something they don't. And let me tell you, sometimes we are that child with God. Sometimes we throw our tantrums because God didn't give us what we wanted, acting like a snotty teenager who got told they couldn't go to the party. Ugh, Dad, I hate you. But you know what? Our good Father loves us anyway. He's patient with us, even whenever we don't know how to act or trust. We didn't understand that our good Father was actually looking out for us all that time that he was saying no to us. I mean, if you think back at your own life, were there ever things you prayed to God that he said no to, and you're glad he did not answer your prayer in the way you asked? We do not always pray what we most need. And so when God says no, it's because he wants to say yes to something better. John Newton, he said this, "Everything is needful that he sends. Nothing can be needful that he withholds." Or perhaps you like how the distinguished theologian Mick Jagger said it better. You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes. Tim Keller, he put it this way, "God gives you everything you would have asked for if you knew what he knows." J.M. Monsaber said, "If God would concede me his omniscience for 24 hours, you would see how many changes I would make in the world." Or omnipotence. You would see how many changes I would make in the world. "But if he gave me his wisdom too, I would leave things as they are." You see, to say, "God, I trust you," is to lay down a heavy burden. The burden of assumed omniscience. See, you may think you know what the best outcome is, but you don't. Not really. That's a challenge for us. Are you looking to dictate to God how he should act? Can you see the answers he's actually giving over the answers you're looking for? Are you able and willing to hear God say no to you because he says he's got something better? If you need confidence that God can work through a no, look no further than what happened at Gethsemane. What did Jesus pray there in that garden? The day before he went to the cross, "Lord, let this cup pass from me." Did God answer that prayer the way that Jesus asked directly? No. Jesus still went to the cross. He still bled. He still died. And yet, through that no, through the greatest evil and suffering ever this planet has ever seen, came the greatest salvation this planet has ever seen. God said no in order to say a better yes. That is why we're gathered here today. And so when your suffering feels unbearable and you do not understand what's going on past the darkness, remember the cross. Just as Jesus was led to carry a cross, God may lead you to carry a cross too. In fact, Jesus, that's what he says it means to follow him. Paul, he understood this. The Apostle Paul, he had his thorn, he had his prison cell, he had his persecutors. Eventually, he would have his execution for the faith. Yet, in all that, he wrote, "The sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing to the glory that is to be revealed." How could he say that? Well, because of what happened on Easter. The bedrock of our faith. The greatest thing that we can remember and rejoice in is the resurrection. You see, you think what you need is for God to heal your right now situation. But think about this. Every person that God miraculously healed, or Jesus miraculously healed during his ministry, the blind man, the leper, Lazarus even, where are they now? All dead. Every single one. See, Jesus gave them a temporary blessing, more time, more life, more health, but eventually they all died anyway. Which means as much as we want God to fix our right now brokenness, that's not the most ultimate thing. That's not the big picture greatest need we have. As real and as good as it would be for God to meet us in our current darkness and bring the light, and sometimes he does that. He does that when we cry out to him. But that is not the most ultimate thing. What we most need is not for God to make our lives comfortable and nice right now. We don't just need deliverance from something difficult. We need deliverance from death. We need God not to just rescue us for now, but to rescue us forever. And that's exactly what he does on Easter. On Easter morning, Christ claimed the only victory that ultimately matters over death and the condemnation of sin. All the other darkness we face, as real and as painful as it is, it sits in a totally different category. See, compared to what was conquered by the cross and the empty tomb, everything else is small potatoes. And that means no matter what darkness you're in, you can trust God because you've already been given the greatest light. See, we're standing in a better position than the prophet Habakkuk ever was. He saw the promise of salvation, but we're standing on the other side of it. We've seen the promise kept. Kept eventually whenever the Israelites would be delivered from Babylon, but kept ultimately, completely, and fully in Jesus. Remember this line from Habakkuk's prayer towards the beginning. He says, "In wrath, remember mercy." In Jesus, God showed both his wrath and his mercy in a single act. The cross is God in wrath, remembering mercy, because what did the cross accomplish? Both the judgment of sin and the way for the forgiveness of sin. That is God in wrath, remembering mercy. The empty tomb, it is the ultimate exodus. It is showing that light has broken through the darkness once and for all, and that stone rolled away as a verdict that light wins. Therefore, we're no longer in darkness. We have been brought into the kingdom of light. So we struggle with whys. We struggle with asking God, why this? God, why that? We look at the darkness of this world, and like Habakkuk, we despair and we question and we ask God, but we must remember and we must rejoice in the ultimate truth. See, the resurrection, it does not answer every why with an explanation. We're not going to understand all the whys. That's the reality. It answers every why with a person and a victory. It declares Jesus has won. And you can live crushed under the weight of every unanswered why, or you can trust in the one who holds all the answers, the one who holds you. Here is my call to you today. Remember and rejoice in the risen Jesus. Life is going to get hard. And so when life gets hard, and it will, remember and rejoice in the risen Jesus. See, God is not a God who saves you from death and sin and then leaves you to figure out the rest on his own. If he has shown his salvation in the most glorious way possible, if he held nothing back, if he gave even his own son, then we can trust him in every other way we have not yet seen. And so here's my challenge to you and my call. Will you trust Jesus in the darkness? As I was preparing this message, God put a song on my heart. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know he holds the future, and life is worth the living just because he lives. As I've been singing it this week, it's been hard for me to get through it without crying. Because I'll be honest, life is not easy for me right now. These past few weeks have been some of the hardest that I can remember, and I've come to points this past week where I've just felt like completely, totally giving up. I just feel sapped of any strength that I don't have what it takes to keep going anymore. And you know what? That thought is true. I don't have the strength. That's why I need Jesus. In Lord of the Rings, the Return of the King, one of my favorite moments in the entire film, the book as well, is when Frodo is so worn down by the journey. He's getting close to the end, but he doesn't feel like he has the strength to keep going anymore. And his companion, Sam, he tries to remind Frodo of the good so that they can keep going. He tries to remind him and help him remember home. Sam says, "Do you remember the Shire, Mr. Frodo? It'll be spring soon, and the orchards would be in blossom, and the birds will be nestling in the hazel thicket, and they'll be sowing the summer barley in the lower fields and eating the first of the strawberries with cream. Do you remember the taste of strawberries?" And Frodo says, "No, Sam, I can't recall the taste of food, nor the sound of water, nor the touch of grass. I'm naked in the dark, with nothing, no veil between me and the wheel of fire." He is so deep in the darkness, he can't even see the good anymore. And it's there. When Sam sees Frodo cannot go on by his own strength anymore, that he says this, "Come on, Mr. Frodo. I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you. And Sam picks up his friend in his arms, and he carries him up that mountain that they must go. Here's what I want you to see. This is a picture of what Jesus does for us in our darkness. When we are overwhelmed by the dark, when we have no strength, He will pick us up and carry us through it. And so although God will sometimes tell us no, and God will sometimes leave us in the darkness for whatever His purposes are that are beyond our comprehension, He has not left us there. He has sent His Son so that we can be carried through it. That is what we remember on this day. So maybe you've come in here carrying a very heavy burden. Maybe today the questions have been louder than the answers. Maybe you can empathize with me. You have laid awake at 2 a.m. some nights, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep as the darkness encompasses you. Let me call you today. Let Jesus carry you. Let Jesus carry you. You can call upon His name, and you can trust He will. Why? Why? Because this we know. Are you ready? Are you ready? He is risen. Let's say that again. He is risen. Amen. Jesus, He walked out of that grave to deliver you so that you do not have to live in darkness. And so because He lives, we can face tomorrow. If you would, please stand and sing with me as we close our service in song.